Have a mic. Just speak loud.
Okay.
It should
Thank
be
you
okay.
all for coming. I'm so excited that people ventured out and actually came. And all of you on Zoom, hello. Thank you for joining us. Oh my gosh, this book, I'm actually amazed that it even came out, that it exists, that any of the books that are coming out right now this month, or in the current months, managed to make it through the writing and the production and to get onto the bookstore shelves. Writing during a pandemic is one of the hardest things I've ever done. And if you excuse me 1 minute, I'm going to take out my glasses, which I neglected to do, so I can see my notes, because otherwise I'm blind. Oh, how is that? Are they indicating that they can hear me, or would? Let me go look. Okay. Just wait 1 second.
Alyssa, you can clip there.
I know, yeah. Here.
Can you all hear her?
Hello, testing.
Okay.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. Right. This book was written during really the height of the pandemic in the fall of 2020, when there was just so much uncertainty. And when all anybody really wanted to do was bake banana bread and binge watch comfort shows on Netflix and Hallmark. But when you're under contract, you have that responsibility to try to focus, to try to, do your job. And my publisher was actually working from home the entire time. I think they're still partially working at home. As soon as the lockdown started, the owner of Kensington sent everyone home to do their work from their home offices. And somehow this all came together as if it was business as usual. So I have a lot of people to thank for this. And I also have 3 very good writer friends to thank for this, because we kept each other sane by keeping in contact pretty much on a daily basis. And that's how this book really got written, through the encouragement and knowing that there was just an incredible team of people working behind it. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the series, just very quickly, it's kind of a Downton Abbey meets Miss Marple. It takes place in the English countryside, and it involves 2 sleuths who work together. The first is Phoebe Renshaw, who's the granddaughter of an earl, so she's an aristocrat. And she has lived most of her life in this little fictional town of Little Barlow at her estate of Foxwood Hall, and is poised and educated and knows how to move through society. The other sleuth, her counterpart, is Eva Hunsford, and she's her lady's maid. Eva is the daughter of farmers. She's partially educated because she was lucky enough to attend the local finishing school on scholarship. So she's semi-educated, and although she's a servant, she happens to love her job. And as was quite common in England in those days, and prior to the early 1920s when this takes place, servants and their employers were like extended families. So there was a great deal of pride that servants felt in serving their family, and there was a sense of loyalty that worked both ways. Almost like in the feudal era, where the lords were responsible for protecting the underlings, and the underlings, or the serfs, were responsible for serving and seeing to the comfort of their overlords. Now, in this particular book, it's 1921, and things have not been great for England since the war ended. There's been a financial downturn. There was an agricultural act during the war that ensured stable prices in agriculture and produce, and it ensured minimum wages for farm workers. But that's been repealed in 1921. So things are about to get very tight in the English countryside and in the rural economy. And combined with that, there were the death taxes that aristocrats had to pay when members of their family died. and things like that. So it's becoming harder and harder to keep these estates running and to keep the village around it thriving. It's very difficult. So Phoebe, being the very forward-thinking young woman that she is, decides well, she's going to open a house for tours, which we know happened, a little bit later and still happens today. Pretty much every grand estate now is part of the National Trust, and they have tours regularly. But this was something new for Phoebe and her family. And, the grandparents, she's an orphan. She and her 3 siblings have been orphaned, but they've been raised by their grandparents, who are old world aristocrats. They don't like the changing world. They don't like the blurring of the classes since the war. The thought of people touring their house is just appalling to them. But she convinces them that let's give it a try. This could help. This could help, bring in money for the tenant farmers and help the village by bringing in people who shop. So they bring in a busload of local school children, but also the members of a historical society. And what can go wrong, right? You giving a house tour in an old estate. Well, have you ever played the board game Clue? This book, for some reason, just really kind of took off in a very Clue-like fashion for me. We have the people, the tour moving through each room of the house, and we see all the rooms. And I even invented some rooms that had never appeared in the books before, because I figured, well, those rooms aren't really needed or used on a regular basis, but for the tour, we're going to include them. And there's a number of character suspects. And again, going back to Clue, when you think about it, the characters are color coded. You had Mrs. Peacock, who's blue, and Miss Scarlet, and Mrs. White, and Mr. Green, and Colonel Mustard. So I knew I had to make these characters very, very distinct, so that they stood out in the minds of the reader. So we have our, Mrs. Peacock, I kind of would be my victim. She's a middle-aged woman, well-to-do, claiming to write a book about the great houses of the Cotswolds. But after she's found dead, we find out she's barely written a chapter. So what was her real purpose in coming to this house and claiming she was writing a book? Each suspect has a secret, and there are all kinds of links between them. That was one of the things I learned early on about writing mystery. The best way to keep your readers guessing is to give every suspect a secret that they're dying to keep hidden. So we have the very proper wife of a politician who's got some deep secrets from her past that she cannot let get out, or it could destroy her husband's career. We have a semi-retired doctor from London who just suddenly appears in the countryside and puts out a shingle and doesn't really care if he gets patients or not. What made him leave London in such a hurry? We have a nerdy bookshop owner in a very weird place. His bookshop is off the beaten trail. It's nowhere where anybody's going to know it's there. There's no reason for people to really be on this road unless they happen to be going to another town or leaving the area. And it turns out this bookshop does have a very big secret in the back room. We have a pair of aristocrats trying to hide the fact that their finances are dwindling. And the husband is trying to hide the fact that he's trying to enhance those dwindling finances in ways that you shouldn't be doing. And a magazine writer who I liken to Miss Scarlet because she's very fashionable and very, just a very modern kind of woman, even though it's the 1920s. So each character, even though they not only look guilty, but they are guilty of something. And Phoebe and Eva, in the course of tracking all these secrets down, come to realize that yes, none of these people are who they say they seem to be, who they say they are. We also have a stolen photograph. Why would anybody steal a photograph out of the house? Nothing else is stolen, nothing of value. And rumors come out that there may be some hidden treasure in this house that no one has ever known about. But, does it have anything to do with the photograph? we're not really sure. But the more they dig, the more this rumor of hidden treasure going back some 50 years comes to light. And as I said, I invented some rooms in the house. I also invented some places in the region of Little Barlow, the fictional town that I had never been to before. But what that did was give me an opportunity to show how different kinds of people lived in that time. You know, of course, you have the aristocrats in their estates, and you had the farmers in their cottages, but you also had a middle class, the politician and his wife. He's a gentleman farmer. So, you know, there's that, you know, that in between kind of class that was emerging more and more. The middle class was growing during that time. And of course, the doctor's house and the tea room. And I really, because I had these two people supposedly writing books, it gave me a reason to bring in some of the historical features of these places. And going back to Clue, the victim is found in the library, strangled by the rope, or in this case, it was a drapery cord. So again, and I didn't even realize it when I was writing the book. It wasn't until later that I sat back and I looked at all this and I went, oh, you know what? This is something I channeled maybe from my youth, because that was my favorite game growing up. Did anybody have a favorite game like that? I see you're nodding.
I
your
like
head.
Clue a lot.
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. It was like a story. Those types of games intrigue me. As Joanne said, I love puzzles. But in a game like Clue or Life or Monopoly, a story unfolds as you play. And I found that, you know, very satisfying and a lot of fun. So this book and the series is what you would call a cozy historical mystery. That means there's no graphic violence, there's no bad language, there's no sex, there's, you know, kiss and fade. It's escapist reading, yes, but it was also escapist writing for me, which I never thought of it that way before. But had I been writing something a lot more serious, I don't know how it would have been to sit down to work every day during those very hard times. Still hard, but you know, especially then. So to be able to immerse myself in a world where even if somebody murders you, they do it politely. You know, they there's nothing nothing that puts your head in a difficult place as you're reading or as you're writing. So that was very important to me. And now I'm busy with I think it's number 8. I believe this is number 7, A Deadly Endowment. So I'm writing number 8. Again, it's you know, the same kind of historical cozy. It's called A Fashionable Fatality, and it involves a very famous fashion designer who was just emerging at that time. She had been working in France all during the war as a hat maker, who slowly diverged into clothing and eventually came to really define women's clothing in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and early 60s, I'd say. And it's still, she's not around anymore, but her clothing is still very much in fashion. So that's what I'm doing now. Does anybody have any questions or any comments they'd like to make? Yes, Al.
When you start the book, do you know who done it with the drapery cord and the study and so on?
What I do when I start a book is I come up with my premise, and that was the Historical Society and the house tour. And then I draw out all my characters and I look at each one. So no, not initially. By the time I start writing, yes, but when I'm plotting, no, I really have to, you know, again, look at all the characters, who's who, what, you know, makes them tick. And sometimes it's changed who the victim is, and sometimes I've changed who the guilty party is partway through, because I realize it may be a better twist in making a change.
And what mysteries always have red herrings, and you talked about, you know, a lot of the characters, they all have a secret, which suggests maybe a lot of them have motivations, and they were all there, you know,
Right.
during the tour. So how do you balance between creating red herrings, but not making the reader feel like they've been deceived? And also that the person who ended up doing it is the one who had to have done it. It's not just the next one on the list. You eliminated all the others and now it's that one.
Right. Well, you do that by leaving those little clues in the beginning, and I did. There were some subtle things that they found. I don't want to give it away, of course, but yeah, something they find outside, the way there was a broken window, the way it was broken, the fact that nobody had any wounds on them. So what did they use? There was no obvious, brick or anything lying around. So things like that should, for the very sharp reader, maybe tip them off. But I think along the way, as we reveal each person's secret, you come to see that, all right, they were up to this. It doesn't mean they didn't kill that person, though.
Mhm.
It just means that the thing that made them look guilty wasn't necessarily connected to the murder. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I
It
mean,
does,
it's very
good, okay.
complicated to do.
Yeah, good.
How do you age the characters? Do you keep them pretty much the same? I mean, to go from one
Right.
mystery to the next,
From
how
book to
do
book.
you age them? Do you leave them the same way, or how do you?
They age very slowly because I tend to do 2 books in that particular year, even though the books are a year apart in real life. They tend to be more like 6 months apart. So they do age. Phoebe has aged. She was only 19 in the first book. Of course, people back then were a little bit older than 19-year-olds are nowadays. People grow faster. But yeah, so now she's about, 21, 22. So she's a young woman now. But again, very slowly. And the same in my other book. Now those are also, in my other series of Gilded Newport mysteries. Same thing. I tend to do 2 books in whatever year they're occurring. So Emma.
So
ages
then you
very
have to be
slowly.
careful not to use like a big historical event as a backdrop to age them. Like how?
Usually there's enough going on in any given year that I don't need to, go to a different year to, to find something interesting. I think with the Lady and Ladies Maid books, they tend to be more self-contained in their plotting. There's less fewer historical events. They're more shaped by the times generally. So it's not maybe one event, historical event that sets off these stories as they can be in the Gilded Newport books. It's more about the general times and life in those days and family dynamics. That's also a very big feature in the Lady and Ladies Maid books, is that we're talking about family, grandparents, the 4 siblings, and the dynamics between them, which are never easy. There's always conflict among them. Yes, Stacy.
Verona is asking if you toured a number of the stately homes before writing your books.
In the Lady and Ladies Maid books, not in a very long time. My husband and I have been to England, Scotland, and Ireland, and we did see a number of the states during those trips. But more recently, no. But there's no lack of information on the internet as far as histories and pictures and who owns these estates and how they run them. So research has played a big part in writing these.
So following on to that, were you something of an expert before you started writing the books, or you were just interested and did your research? and
I'm
travel?
still not an expert, Al.
Okay.
No, I've always been interested in anything in England. That whole area has always fascinated me. So the interest and the reading has always been there. I just focused it more, once I started writing the books. Now, the Newport books, of course, we're there as often as we can be. Not in the past 2 years, but prior to the pandemic, we're up there every year. And visiting all the houses that I write about as much as I can. A couple of them are privately owned or owned by, Salve Regina University. So we haven't been able to get into all of them. But my experience in Newport is a lot more firsthand than it is with the lady and ladies book.
Do you find it hard to stay in period in terms of technology and events and transportation?
Not at all, no.
Like
that's-
cell
that's-
phones don't ring in the
You're
middle of
right, no,
speeches.
no, that's one of the things I love about the period. To me, there's so much charm in not having cell phones and TVs. And it also makes it a lot harder for the sleuths to solve their crime. I'm Sorry, could you give me some water? Yeah, sorry about that. Because they don't have the modern conveniences that they have nowadays. There are no forensics. There's no, in the Newport books, there's no fingerprints. It's a new technology in Eva and Phoebe's world, but I tend to have the situation where there didn't need any fingerprints, or we couldn't get a full print because it's a silken drapery cord, or something like that. So, but no, I really in my head just enjoy going there. It's even in real life, if I can put myself in a situation where the less technology, the better, which is not to say I'm not addicted to my cell phone. I am, as most of us are. But it's something I enjoy very much. Are there any other questions?
Why did you start the second series?
Well,
A Lady's Maid.
that was actually put to me by my agent on behalf of my editor. Gosh, I'm still. Let's see. We're talking several years ago now. God, my voice is just going. Downton Abbey was in full swing, and my editor thought it would be really fun to have a series that combined mystery with a Downton Abbey-like theme. And that was all the guidelines I was given, and I got right on it and submitted it, and he liked what he saw, and that's how the series was born. Yeah.
Since you used Downton Abbey as a point of departure in that era, as they were monetarily aching, many of those families, just like in Downton Abbey, married the wealthy American. Did you infuse that into your book?
I have not. No, at this point I haven't, because I am focusing on the one family. But yeah, it would be very interesting. I actually toyed with the possibility of bringing Consuelo Vanderbilt into the book I'm working on now, because she was in France, living in France at that time, and could have known this famous designer who was also from France, and they could have come over together. But then I decided it was too complicated. It was too much. If I bring her into any book, I would want her to be the primary, secondary character, because she would deserve that. I dealt with her situation of marrying the Duke of Marlborough in Murder at Marlborough House in the Newport books, because Prince wanted no part of it. So that was a major driving factor of that. Yes.
How about the language of the times? There's nothing that bugs me more than if you're reading a book that's in Scotland in this century, or Canada there, or whatever, and then you come across a phrase that didn't come into being until 500 years later.
Right.
So
yeah.
how careful are you on that?
I try to be careful. I have an online etymology dictionary, and I run a lot of things through it. Things will still slip by, unfortunately, because some phrases are so ingrained in us that we don't even stop to think that they might be modern sounding, or maybe they didn't come into being until maybe the 1930s or the 1950s. So it's hard, but I do try to run everything through that. And my editor, the copy editors are usually pretty good at finding things like that. I don't know how they do it, but they manage to. I don't use a lot of slang in the Lady and Lady's Maid books, because I don't feel that the aristocrats used it all that much, especially in 1921. Maybe by 1925, they were getting more into that kind of, the jazzy language. And using formal language It's not as much of a chance that I'm gonna, use a anachronistic phrase. Yes, Stacy.
Stephanie is asking if you could explain the writing process from beginning to finish.
Just a small question. No problem. Yeah, well, like I said, I start with my premise. In this case, it was actually bringing the house tour to Foxwood Hall. So the premise begins it. I start thinking about the kind of characters that should people a story like that. And I came up with the Historical Society because I thought, who more interested in touring a grand house? And it's not something that they would have had the opportunity to do in those days very often. So they would be really interested. A Historical Society also gave me the opportunity to have a lot of different kinds of people connected. They have something in common, whereas otherwise they wouldn't have. So that helped me, make links between them. So I get my characters, and as I said, I kind of see what makes all of them tick. So who do I want to kill off? Who do I think would be an intriguing, interesting killer? And I go back a bit in their history so that I know where they've been and why they're the way they are. Once I have my characters set, then I can begin building my plot. I cannot plot without knowing who those characters are. I have tried it, it doesn't work. I can't come up with ideas, but once I do, the book, I don't know, you sit down, you begin writing the synopsis. It's more of an outline at first. I use dry erase boards, I use paper, I make diagrams. For some reason that helps, I don't really know why. I use something called Plotter, which is an easy plotting tool. You don't write in. It's not as complicated as Scrivener, it's a lot simpler. But again, the visuals really help me. You can do a timeline, or you can do them, like in more of a list form, and you have really nice character sketching available through it. So that really helps. And then somehow the synopsis begins to flow for about halfway through. So at that point, I start writing. I write, maybe 3-4 chapters, or until I run out of synopsis. But by then, I really know who the characters are and what they've been up to, and what they're capable of. And at that point, I finish the synopsis, usually because my editor has asked for it. At that point, like it's overdue by a couple of months. So I say, oh yeah, it's almost done. And I write it and then continue writing the book. And at that point, all the pressure is off, because now I have a full synopsis. I know where I'm going every day when I sit down. So that's pretty much it. So it sounds a little harem scare maybe, but that works for me. I'm not a super organized writer. Yes.
ER is asking, how did you begin writing your career?
Oh, I've always written. Well, as a career, no, but I was always writing as a child, loved to write stories. I worked in editing after college for a reference book company that wasn't really very creative, but I met a friend who was writing romance at the time. It was her big secret. And when her first book was bought and published, she let the secret out, and she just drew me into that world. So I joined the Florida Romance Writers. As Joanne said, I used to write romance. And yeah, one day I sat down. I loved the medieval period at that time, so I just sat down and with a pen and paper started writing a book, knowing nothing. I wrote 6 books. My 6th book was published, and then my 5th book, and I think my 4th book. I managed to actually sell some of those manuscripts, but after I had already sold one. And then one day I kind of realized that I loved mystery threads. All of my romance had either a mystery or a thriller or some kind of suspense thread. And I thought, I think what I really should be doing is writing mystery. And I sat down, I talked to my agent, we came up with some ideas. I had my connections to Newport with my husband, and it was very personal to me. So I wrote Murder at the Breakers and sold it. That's how I became a mystery author.
And I was at the breakers and they carry all your books.
Oh, I love to hear that. That never gets old.
In the
Um,
gift shop.
Yeah, the Preservation Society has really been wonderful. They just embraced the series. They're so supportive. Whenever I'm up there, they'll have me come in and sign. They've been amazing. Yeah, really grateful for that. Yes.
What inspired you to write about the Sinister Service?
So who asked that? I'm just kidding. No, it's a really good question. It's just, it has to be from somebody who really knows me. I love teacups. This is a Sinister Service is about the siblings going to Staffordshire, which was where all of English china was being made. And they're there to commission a china set for their grandparents' anniversary. The story I did came because I have a collection of Shelley teacups, which were made in Staffordshire in England. And the way I came about that was I had an email from a woman whose mother found some of the Newport books at her nursing home and started reading them. And she had lived in Newport in the 40s. So these books were just brought her back to a really happy time in her life. The mother passed away and the daughter sent me these 4 Shelley teacups that her mother had used, turns out, with my husband's great aunt because she was renting an apartment in the great aunt's house. So these teacups actually came full circle from the family back to family, which was amazing. I did research and found out that Shelley is really kind of a remarkable manufacturer of teacups because they are among the thinnest ever made because of their formula. And I went from 4 teacups to, I don't know, to having to buy cabinets to put them in. So that's where Sinister Service came from. So whoever asked that, yes, I think you probably knew about the teacups. Anybody who follows me on Facebook probably knows that.
Questions over there?
No, you good? All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Those of you who are here and those of you who tuned in on Zoom, thank you for spending your afternoon with me. I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best. Stay safe. Bye.
Well done.
Do you want to sign this one? Do they give you a pen? It's usually under the podium.
Oh, the charter.